Hello, we are announcing a brand new giveaway for 75,000 subscribers. All you have to do is obviously follow me. We are giving away one lightsaber from Art Sabers. They are sponsoring this giveaway, so what you have to do is go to the pinned comment down below, follow Art Sabers on Instagram, like their image, and tag 2 of your friends, and you will be entered into our giveaway. We will be doing this giveaway until we hit 75,000 subscribers here on PPSW. Thank you again for your continuous support. Our story continues inside of a small medical bay of a Republic cruiser. Vader was locked down to the medical bay table, and next to him was the gentle voice of Revan. Vader hadn't heard this voice since before their little journey to Drama Kaz. Vader's Sith eyes still sat prevalent in his face. He ripped and tugged at the bed, but he couldn't free himself. Revan placed his hand on Anakin's shoulder and filled his mind with a blinding light. Anakin jolted back into the bed, and his mind went to a memory transferred over from Revan. The reformed Jedi watched Anakin's body twitch as he passed in the past year of his life into Skywalker's mind. Everything from his mind wiping to the resurgence of his memories when he was told about the truth from Bastila and Malak, all the way to his final encounter with his former friend and his former student. What had happened was a complete change in Revan, and after a year-long journey across the galaxy with Bastila and a couple of other individuals he befriended, he learned a lot about himself. Of course, Revan didn't remember everything from before his mind wiping, but for the most part of the past year, he knew what was going on. Anakin watched Revan's journey in his mind's eye. When Anakin was unconscious, Revan led a battle assault on the Star Forge, and when he attacked the Superstation, he was able to defeat his rivals. Bastila, who was turned to the dark side of the Force, used her battle meditation against the Republic forces. When Revan defeated Malak and confronted Bastila, he didn't want to kill her, so he gave her a chance at redemption if she used her battle meditation against the Sith forces, and she did. Revan and Bastila were able to escape, and in their escape, the Star Forge was destroyed for good. Revan showed the process of helping Skywalker heal from his injuries, and how he could overcome them, and then he exited Skywalker's mind. Skywalker's head recoiled, and he looked at Revan, his yellow tint disappearing from his eyes. Revan didn't remember much about Anakin, but he knew him. He knew he had him as a student of sorts, and he wanted to finish what he started. Being that Revan was able to overcome his stint in the dark side of the Force, he thought it was important to teach that to someone that he was informed was the chosen one. When Revan looked down at Anakin, he began to unlatch his restraints. The second Anakin's left arm was free, he stretched it out and Revan went flying across the room. Anakin's yellow eyes returned, and Vader became hungry with power, reaching over and ripping the restraints off his robotic arm and off his legs as well. Revan got up slowly in the other room, after crashing through a wall. He typically wouldn't allow that to happen. He simply didn't expect it. Otherwise, he would have resisted it. But the strength of the Chosen One was building. The Sith holocrons he used and the knowledge he gained over the past year in the dark side with Malak and all the knowledge before that allowed him to feel confident enough to try and fight back against Revan. Once to his feet, Revan leapt back across the room, but Vader was gone. Revan looked around and then looked up. Vader had leapt into a ventilation shaft. Revan immediately called out a high security alert. Bastila, who was meditating, trying to find peace again, opened her eyes to the rattle in her heart. She was startled by the sounds of the alarms and jolted up. When she opened the doors, she saw men running down the hallways and the lights flickering into a red dim. She asked what was happening, but none of the troops responded. When she saw Revan booking it down the hallway with another lightsaber in her hand, she looked at him and asked what it was. He told her that Skywalker escaped. Bastila knew that wasn't good. She told Revan she would head for the bridge. Revan thought that'd be a good idea. He told her that their motive should be to immobilize him, to stop him from doing any damage, and then they could try and work on bringing him back to the light side of the Force. She agreed, and the two of them split off. As Bastila turned the corner, she heard blaster fire. The men were trying to subdue Skywalker, but even without a lightsaber, he had himself a weapon. It's called a wall. Vader ripped panels off of the wall and tossed them at the troopers, and used the walls to defend himself. Vader saw Bastila and panicked. He remembered her ever so slightly from his fight with her and Malak. He knew she got lucky, but he didn't want to play that game with her again, because she did after all cut off his forearm. Vader threw the panels at her and then turned around and ran away. She slid between the massive panels and reached out with the Force to catch him, but he slipped through her grip. She closed her eyes. She almost dug into the dark side again, but she couldn't. She didn't want to go back to the darkness, and upon the recoil, she fell to her knees. She heard her voice from behind her. It was Revan, and a couple of troops. He reached under her arm and asked if she was alright. She nodded her head, and told him that Skywalker was escaping. She would be fine. Revan acknowledged what she said and jumped up to his feet and started running after Skywalker. He turned down the hallway and saw people burnt to a crisp, and the robotic arm that was attached to Anakin's arm on the floor. Revan kept running, knowing that Vader would likely weaken himself. He'd been knocked out for little more than a couple of months. His life was completely sustained by his connection to the Force. Revan rounded the corner and saw Vader. with a grapple tied around his neck. There were Republic troopers stunning him, but he wasn't stopping. All the adrenaline running through his system was keeping him going. Revan reached out with the Force and turned Skywalker's mind off with a flick of a switch, putting a blinding light in front of his eyes and sending him back into the dark abyss that was his mind. Revan told the men to release him, and they did. Revan picked up Skywalker and walked him back to the room they had him in originally. He buckled the young Sith down to the table and restricted him. Revan afterwards told the captain of the vessel to drop them off at a planet that was near their current location. The captain was confused, because the planet didn't always have much of a population, but Revan told him to do it anyways. Within a couple of hours, Revan, Bastila, T3M4, and a still unconscious Anakin Skywalker landed. Revan had a plan in mind for this. Some of it was a little selfish on his part, but he believed it would work out favorably for all parties. Firstly, Revan wanted to make Skywalker stay away from all the affluence around the galaxy, and secondly, he wanted alone time with Bastila. They were close, but they hadn't yet confessed their truest of feelings for each other. Bastila wasn't entirely sure why Revan brought Skywalker here, but she trusted Revan's intuition. Having been the one that returned from the dark side himself, and saved her from the dark side of the Force, surely there could be something he could do to bring Skywalker back from the dark side. Revan set everything up in a small camp for the four of them, and then he took the medical table that Anakin was on and floated it out to the middle of the field and waited until Skywalker woke up. It took a couple of hours, and when Anakin woke up, he was furious. He began swinging from the second his eyes opened, and then he looked around to realize he was all alone. The fields were empty, and there was nothing but the echo of the whispering wind. His anger faded from his mind, and his eyes were filled with a terrible sadness. He looked out across the field, and then turned to the small mountain or rock formations around him. Vader put himself back on the table and looked around again, trying to find a means to escape. At this point, the planet Lothal was occupied, and there was a city, but it was very small, very unoccupied at that. If anything, it was a foundational level of what could truly develop into a city and a population. However, it wasn't anything near where Skywalker was. He was left in an open field all alone. Vader, after looking around him, realized that he was all alone. It definitely hit him at home, a little bit. 11 years old and all alone, after a life of what felt to be neglect. The darkness that filled his mind evaporated into a soulless echo. Vader's head fell back on the bed behind him, and he looked up into the sky. A Morai owl fluttered over him. Anakin, in all honesty, would like nothing better than to kill it, but he felt like he was melting, like his body would slip into the ground and vanish beneath the soil. His energy was gone. It wasn't from using the Force, but it was because he seemingly couldn't continue to do this. To keep feeling such rage and be filled with such anger and disappointment and regret and cowardice, Anakin in his mind felt like he was a coward for falling into the despair of the darkness. Maybe he was. Left alone with his own thoughts made him feel as such. He turned his head over and lifted his arm. His forearm was still missing, and nothing was left but the nub left behind by Malik's apprentice. Anakin felt back to that memory, the rage, the anger, all fueled by his resentment, and yet here he was, with nothing and no one. A life so short with nothing to show for himself. He was really the chosen one, or was he just a fraudulent concept invented by the Jedi so that Revan could drag him along with him? A way for the Jedi to not deal with him in hopes that Revan would forget him somewhere, or maybe something worse. But in reality, nothing was worse than what was done to him. There was nice moments, but it was filled with all neglect. An idea of maybe it wasn't so bad, but it was just longing for companionship, to have a friend or an idealistic version of a friend that never was. That was a worse suffering than death itself. Nothing to cap it off like Malik's intended usage of him, just to gripe for power only to realize that he was too insignificant in Malik's eyes. All that was longed for was a companion, but Malik wanted someone to rise into a Sith student, only for Malik to realize that Skywalker was stronger than he'd ever be. After all of his hard work and dedication, only for the Master to try and replace him by trying to kill him, and yet there was nothing to show for it. Malik was dead, Bastila was a Jedi once more, and Skywalker was all alone on some planet remotely left in the galaxy. Revan from around the corner fell to his knees. He could feel the thoughts coursing through Anakin's mind. His hand was stretched outward and he slowly brought it back to his face, fearing that he was the creator of such a vile being, the creator of someone who had purity of heart but defined by the scars across his body. Bastila stood behind Revan with a hand on his shoulder, feeling all the same raw emotions that he was feeling. She withheld tears from her eyes. Vader never wanted to become Vader. He just longed for the love he wanted, the love he deserved just as much as any other living being deserved it. Revan stood up, using the side of the rock to help himself up, and then when he took a step forward, Bastila tightened her grip on his shoulder. He turned around with an inquisitive look in his eyes. She shook her head, suggesting that he shouldn't. Revan knew she had a point, but if they allowed Skywalker to dwell in his sadness, then he would surely become resentment, and resent them if they revealed that they were here the entire time. She knew he was right, both of them had a great point, but the lesser of two of the evil options was confronting him now, rather than allowing him to dwell in his suffering all alone. Bastila slowly took away her hand off of Revan's shoulder, and then he turned around and stepped out from behind the rock. Vader didn't hear him, and he continued to rummage through his thoughts all alone, though the Force was able to pick up on the sound of Revan's footsteps through the soft grass. So he leapt from his bed and turned around. Vader backpedaled, feeling cornered like a feral animal. He looked for something to defend himself with, but there was nothing. He put his hand out in front of him. Revan put both of his hands up, telling him that he didn't want to hurt him. Vader moved backwards, not trusting a single word he had to say. How could he? There was no way that he could trust him. Why would he? Revan dropped his lightsaber on the ground to show that it was safe. Vader could feel Bastila's presence, and he turned his head looking for her. His skin trembled, his body ached. He hadn't had food in forever. He was being fueled by the Force. As a child, this should have killed him, but he was a chosen one. It was the only reason he was still alive. Anakin couldn't find Bastila, and so he turned his eyes back to Revan, demanding to know where she was. The wicked woman cut his arm off, and he wasn't going to let it happen again, or worse. Revan told him that neither of them were trying to hurt him or here to hurt him. They were here to help him. Vader stopped in his tracks, looking at the two of them. T3-M4 rolled up behind Revan with Vader's arm, the robotic one that is. Revan told Anakin that he could reattach his arm for him, but they needed to trust him. If he couldn't trust them, then this wouldn't work for anyone. Anakin nodded his head and reached out his arm, telling Revan to toss the robotic arm to him. Revan did so and asked Vader if they could talk. Anakin turned his head back and forth. There was nowhere for him to go. He could run, but that wouldn't get him anywhere. No weapon, exhausted and likely to die of starvation or dehydration. He needed Revan, but how could he trust someone who didn't give him a chance before? Revan spoke up. He said he was sorry for everything. He admitted his inability to remember what happened previously, but he told Vader that if he could do it all over again, he would have done it differently. Anakin shouted back, telling him that he was sure he would. Of course he would, because then he wouldn't have to deal with this dark side maniac on the other side of him. Anakin shouted at him, telling Revan that he just wanted a teacher and a friend, and all he got was an abuser. A wave of shame crossed over Revan's body. He knew it, but he didn't. He understood Anakin's frustration, and so he put his hand out, telling Skywalker that they could start over again, right here and right now. It was all up to him if he wanted to partake in that. If he did, then surely they could make it work. Vader shook his head. He didn't know what to do. Revan took a step forward, ever so slightly, enough for Vader to see it, but not enough to make him feel like it was being threatened. Vader shook his head, but Revan took another step forward. Anakin's eyes were still yellow, but they weren't golden. It was a cross between yellow and blue, turning them to a yellowish green. Anakin stumbled backwards. Revan took some more steps until they were standing in front of each other. Revan got down onto his knees and slowly told Anakin to trust him. Anakin didn't want to. He couldn't. There was no feasible way for him to do so. Anakin told Revan that he didn't trust him or Bastila, but he could try and stand them for a little bit. Revan told Anakin that's all he needed. There was no need to rush things. Anakin nodded his head. From around the corner, Bastila came up from behind Revan. The sun was beginning to set on Lothal, and she had started a fire in their camp to keep them warm. Vader asked for his lightsaber, and Revan pulled it off his belt and tossed it in front of him. Anakin looked down at it as it creased the grass it lay in him. He picked it up and held it in his dominant arm, moving it back and forth. It felt so weird having to do it with the robotic arm. The weird thing is that the robotic arm made the weight of the blade feel lighter, but it's simply because the robotic arm was stronger than human flesh. Revan stood up and walked away from Anakin, telling him that whenever he was ready, there was food inside the camp. T3-M4 followed Revan back to the camp, and the three of them got themselves situated. Anakin stood alone for hours, thinking about everything. Thousands of thoughts crossed his mind, and yet he couldn't escape the confusion he felt about this entire situation. It was really weird. In a way, it was the most care he was ever shown by Revan, but Skywalker knew he couldn't just trust someone based on their words. He needed to see what their actions were. If the actions proved to be what their words said, maybe he could begin to trust them. He stayed away from the camp for hours, but he began to get cold. Wearing light garments at night, he was bound to get cold, and so he made his way for the camp. Bastila and Revan were sitting next to each other talking. When they saw Skywalker, they stopped, and they looked up at him. He slowly edged closer and closer to the fire and sat down in front of it without saying a word. They both smiled at him and continued their conversation. Revan, while in the middle of the conversation, got some food from a pack and walked it around the fire carefully and held out his hand towards Anakin. The boy took the food and demolished it. Revan told Anakin that the two of them were going for a hike in the morning, and he asked if he would like to come along with them. He was certainly skittish, but he agreed to do so. The Jedi were looking for an ancient Jedi temple. The Jedi had been around for 22,000 years at this point. They had a temple here, and it would be worth their time to try and find the temple that was built here. Anakin nodded his head quietly. When the morning came, the trio and the droid went for a walk. They covered the plains, finding nothing. This exercise would carry on for weeks. In reality, Revan knew exactly where the temple was. However, the point of this harmless harmless lie was to convince Skywalker to trust them. His eyes were still a yellowish green, but the natural blue color was beginning to shine through. During these couple of weeks, Anakin would turn 12 years old, and it would be celebrated by the two Jedi and the droid. Skywalker began to trust them a little bit, and his darkness faded. However, Revan made a point to tell Anakin that completely abolishing the darkness wouldn't exactly help him. Revan expressed that his usage of the dark side was helpful, but it wasn't reliant on it. Anakin listened in and learned. Over the past couple weeks, the two of them built up a bond. It was a lot different between the bond that Anakin and Bastila had. There was still some obvious tension considering she cut off his forearm. Her approach was similar to Revan's, but Anakin didn't remotely trust her like he kinda did Revan. Trusting Revan was kind of a stretch to say the least, but it was the closest word to me how he felt about it. In all honesty, it was almost entirely based on survival. He wouldn't be able to survive without either of the two of them, and it forced him into this situation. At first it felt like captivity, but shortly it became like a bond. Not tight, still loose, but something was framing. After Revan noticed this connection starting to form, he brought the Jedi to the temple here on Lothal, but he turned and told them that he couldn't open the temple without a student. He reached his hand out to Skywalker and asked Anakin's permission to teach him again. Anakin looked at the hand for a moment. He thought about it, and everything that had come before. Revan showed so much more attentiveness now than he did before. Originally, it felt like Revan just liked ranting about manifestos and idealism to him, but this Revan felt like he genuinely cared about him. So, in a leap of faith, he reached out his hand and took Revan's hand with his robotic arm. Revan smiled at Anakin, but there was still fear entrenched on Anakin's face. The poor boy looked like a grown man. His face had creases in it, and he wore his stress very heavily on himself. Revan turned with Skywalker and told him to reach out his hand and use the Force to lift the massive structure. The two of them did, and the structure began to move. As it crawled up, an entrance was revealed, and the three Jedi walked in. Revan told Skywalker that when they got there, they would begin a meditation. Each of them individually would have their own visions of what they needed and how it would guide them on their next steps of the journey. Revan lightly placed his hand on Anakin's shoulder to see if he would get a negative reaction, but none came. As the two of them walked in, with Bastila behind them, Revan told Anakin to trust the Force. What he saw would tempt him, it would scare him, and it would challenge him. All he needed to do was trust himself and the Force around him, and everything would be revealed. Anakin nodded his head. When he got in, he knelt down and waited. He felt the Force crushing down and around him, and before he knew it, he was the first one gone. Anakin was led down a path. He could see Malak in front of him. Then behind Malak was a voice he'd only heard once, a menacing voice that called out to him, requesting him to return to the darkness. When Skywalker turned away from the voice, he was confronted by three villains. They were all standing before him, and they were menacing. One was massive, the other was old, and the third was not present. He was, but he wasn't. It was weird. Something created by Malachor when Revan defeated Mandalore the Ultimate. Regardless, Skywalker denied their call to him. He denied their strength, and he denied their influence. Skywalker fell to his knees and they vanished. A voice called out to Anakin. He looked up and saw an older man. He'd never seen this man before, and the man told Anakin that he embodied what a Jedi truly was. His path had yet been decided, but what he truly desired could be his if he embraced the path before him. The night was always darkest before the dawn. If Skywalker carried on this path, then he would surely reach what it was he truly desired. The man then vanished. Anakin wanted to know who he was, but he didn't have time. He exited the vision and found himself outside the temple. Sitting next to him were people with him, but they were dead. The vision wasn't gone. He looked up into the fiery skies of desolation. Revan spoke to Skywalker with his dying breath, asking that he bring balance to the Force so that this pain could never be experienced again. Anakin jolted up inside the temple. He looked around. Revan and Bastila were gone. His heart was racing, and he slowed himself down and looked around. He closed his eyes and he meditated, waiting for the other two to return from their visions. When they did, they left the temple with a whole new perspective. While Revan and Bastila's visions were equally as tantalizing, a lot of pressure sat on Skywalker's shoulders. He was 12, but he felt like he had to bring balance to the Force all by himself, which was far from the truth. He just needed to trust the Force and the two adults that were with him, and he would find his path. Revan and Bastila both came to the conclusion that it was time to move on from Lothal to another planet around the galaxy. The Sith were going to emerge soon, and the Jedi had to stop them. While Revan, Bastila, and Anakin weren't Jedi, it was the closest faction to what they really were. Though before they left, Revan and Bastila admitted their truest feelings for each other, and then decided that despite their feelings, they should sideline them for the time being, putting off an eventual marriage and focus on what lay before them, the chosen one, and bringing balance to the Force. They both agreed, and it would be better for them to focus on the greater threat to the galaxy rather than what they individually wanted. It was a sacrifice, but a sacrifice that would be worthwhile. The three Jedi then departed back to Coruscant. The reason for doing so was that they could learn where the Sith were, or if the Sith were still around. Skywalker had been to Coruscant since he was an infant, and when he saw the Grand City, he was amazed. It was the most incredible sight he'd ever seen. The Skywalkers touched the sky, and the world felt surreal. Anakin, since Lothal, had mellowed out some. There was still a lot of rage that existed within his soul and within his being, but he was able to control it. He had Revan, and the slightest of teachings were already having an effect on him. When the Jedi got there, it was obvious the Council wasn't fond of Revan or Bastila, considering they were kind of rebels. While they hadn't yet married, it wasn't hard to pick up on the bond that existed between the two of them. The Council couldn't just accuse them of having a bond, but they could disperse the three of them to a part of the galaxy. So that's what they did, telling them that there were reports of the Sith in the Outer Rim, and dispatching the Jedi back out there to where they previously were. Revan, during this time, began to have nightmares of the Sith. Currently, they were fragments of Revan's former Sith Empire bouncing around. However, there was a lot of infighting going on between the Sith. The trio left Coruscant, Revan believing that their fight would be useless without Skywalker receiving the training he needed. Instead of searching for the Sith, Revan took Skywalker and Bastila to Yavin 4 to complete Anakin's training. Revan, by this point, had become aware of the neglect his student faced for the first part of his life, and he wanted to right those wrongs. Yavin 4 would be a great place to do that, as long as they stayed clear of Exar Kun's temple and the dark aura left behind by him. When they arrived on Yavin, they set up a camp, and Revan told Anakin what they were doing here. At this point, Revan made it clear that Skywalker would have to trust Bastila at some point, and it would go a long way in helping him overcome the dark side of the Force. He understood, but he told him that it was hard. He tried to trust her, but every time he looked at his arm, he was reminded by what she did to him. Revan understood his student's pain and told him that they would work on it together. Anakin at this point was easing himself away from the dark side and finally embracing a healthy balance in the Force, finding happiness and peace. Revan worked with Skywalker, and in this moment he was able to embrace the balance. As a preteen, it was difficult to do, but he listened to Revan and came to terms with his past, accepting that it had happened, but it was time to move on. Revan's big philosophy was that, while yes, it was difficult and it was hard, he wouldn't be here without that past. He wouldn't have conquered and overcome without those memories, without those hardships. Revan and Anakin were currently atop of an ancient pyramid on the planet, and they were seated overlooking the scenery. Revan truthfully apologized for everything that had become of their past relationship. Their past was riddled with terrible times, and it was a shared pain. Revan had apologized before, but in this moment, a heart-to-heart, he was able to communicate it the best way he could. He felt truly sorry, and he never wanted Skywalker to be left on his own again. In a way, Revan embodied a neglectful father figure, but in the end, at this moment, he embraced the role that he was meant to fill for his young student. Not just a teacher, and not just a mentor, but a familial role. Anakin had kinda come around to Bastila, but it was still hard. In this moment, Anakin and Revan hugged it out, and they moved on from their past, accepting it for what had happened, but not letting it control their present selves. The two of them moved past their usage of the Force and worked on their usage of the lightsaber. Revan used Form 4, but Skywalker from his time with Malak fell into Form 5. Of course, it was something that he wanted to stick with, but being that they had different lightsaber forms, it allowed both of them to gain something entirely from their training. Anakin still refused to train with Bastila, which Revan completely understood. However, he was slowly trying to push Anakin into trusting Bastila. Not that he would spar with her, but in all simplicity, accept her and trust her. After someone cuts off your forearm, it's kind of hard to see them as friendly, especially since Anakin was still so young. Though their time on Yavin would last for a number of years, Anakin began to rather age quickly, and without feeling a constant state of depressive influence stress, he was able to heal and grow a little more naturally. His relationship with Revan was a very important part of his growth. Without it, he would have likely been very neglectful to the idea of growing. Bastila usually kept her distance from Skywalker for the most part. She wanted to befriend him and have a bond with him, but she also didn't want to scare him back into his rage and into the dark side. Likely she wouldn't be capable of doing that to Anakin, but she also still had that fear of doing it. Revan and Skywalker would climb the pyramids on Yavin every day for a meditation at sunset, and then when it was dark, they would spar. Their lightsabers no longer crimson. Skywalker's had just been purified, but it wasn't white. Rather, it was amethyst, just like the weapon that belonged to his master. When Anakin was 17 years old in the year 3950 BBY, he and Bastila connected. They spent 4 years on Yavin, and Revan turned Skywalker into an absolute beast. Anakin was deadly as Vader when he was 11, but as a 17-year-old, he had the power that could rival that of the entire Council of the Jedi. This particular year was very special. The Sith Civil War had come to a close, and the Sith Triumvirate had dissipated with the rest of the Sith. Without Revan, it was much more difficult of an undertaking for Metra Suck, but the group of Jedi were able to stop the Triumvirate and the other Sith. There was still a Sith that remained, but at this moment it seemed like the Sith had been erased from the galaxy. Bastila and Revan hadn't yet fully gone into their love, and having held back, they didn't yet have a child, essentially taking Anakin as their own. However, Anakin and Bastila were able to finally build up a relationship. It wasn't easy, but it finally came together. It started when Anakin told Revan that he wanted to train with Bastila for a day. She was very caught off guard by it, but she was incredibly nervous the entire time. She really wanted to be the best teacher she could be for Skywalker, but she felt like she would fail him by being herself. Anakin finally came around to her, accepting his past with her and fully allowing himself to move on. It was very tense, very robotic. She had a very different perspective on everything, but she genuinely was afraid of reminding him of their first encounter. After a full day with each other, they had a talk that resulted in an understanding. She told Anakin that she wanted to be whatever he needed her to be. And without a response, he embraced her in a massive hug. It was a moment of vulnerability on both of their parts for the first time with each other. The two of them sat at the top of the same pyramid and had a very nice conversation, and just as the sun went down, the two of them ignited their weapons and had a spar. It was a very lovely spar, but it was tense at first. The last time they fought, Bastila cut Anakin's face and his arm off. So, she was a bit fearful, but they got into a rhythm, and then they were able to have a spar at full speed. Bastila really enjoyed this because she felt welcomed into Anakin's life, and she felt like she could truly contribute to him as an individual. The three of them would begin training together consistently. However, after Anakin expressed his fondness with both of them, Revan and Bastila consecrated their relationship. The two of them married on Yavin 4, and T3 and Anakin were there for it joyfully. It was a beautiful private ceremony for the two of them to enjoy their marriage. Though there was something bothering Revan. He had been having nightmares about a bad place. He wasn't sure what or where it was, but Revan explained it to Skywalker. Anakin told him he knew exactly what it was. Skywalker got shivers just thinking of it, but he explained that when Anakin was just a boy, about 7 years before, they went to the planet of Dromund Kaz for about a couple months. When they left, Revan, Malak, and himself were servants of the dark side. Skywalker told the two of them that he wasn't sure if he himself was ready to confront the Sith Emperor. They looked at each other, and then back to him, asking why that was. As Skywalker explained that Vitiate was building an army. He was strong with the dark side, and the last time they went there, he was able to flip their world upside down, turning Revan into a servant of the dark side, and creating an army that only fell apart this year. It took 7 years to get over what he turned them into, and it cost the life of Malak. If they failed again, then there would be no force in the entire galaxy that could stop the three of them, especially being that Anakin was so strong as a boy, not to mention how strong he would become if he was possessed as a young man. The two of them understood the point he was making, but if the Sith Emperor was so powerful, they had to confront him, because if they didn't, the galaxy wouldn't be able to survive an encounter with him. Anakin understood, but he told Revan and Bastila that he needed more training. He wasn't yet at the level he needed to be. Revan thought for a moment, and then he told Skywalker that they would return to Coruscant and have Anakin challenge the entire Jedi Council. If he could defeat them, then he would be confirmed ready to take on the Sith Emperor. Anakin nodded his head and thought that, in all fairness, it would be the best comparison of power for him. The three of them and T3 departed for Coruscant, and when they arrived at the council chambers, Skywalker just stood before them and challenged the entire council to a spar, telling them that it was his greatest trial. The council saw no reason to decline in the challenge, and so they did so, going into the training arena and fighting with the Chosen One himself. The council consisted of 13 members, and they all immediately ignited their weapons, challenging the Chosen One and fighting with him. Anakin's speed was faster than the eye could catch, even for more experienced Force users. Being trained in balance of the Force, his most natural state, he was able to outmatch just about anyone. Anakin, having spent so much time in the state of perpetual darkness, was empowered by the strength of the Force when he utilized its balance. He moved around flawlessly, blocking and countering where he could. Bastila and Revan had trained him well, and they were watching from the side. Skywalker lifted members off their feet with the Force, and within 20 minutes, he was the sole victor among the High Council. Some of the members were outraged, some were disappointed in themselves, and the rest were inspired and impressed. How could they not be impressed? They were the best the Jedi had to offer, and they were dispatched like they were nothing. The Council wanted to offer Skywalker a spot on the High Council, and even give him the rank of Master for his prowess in the Force, but he politely declined it. His ideals didn't line up with the Order or the Council itself, and he believed that sitting on the Council would only steal away his ability to harmonize with the Force. He preferred where he stood, especially since the Council agreed to disagree with Revan and Bastila's marriage. Their arrangement was that the two of them could keep their relationship, however, they were not permitted to share their ideals with anyone else within the Jedi Order. Regardless, after Skywalker obliterated the High Council, he felt the confidence to try and face Vitiate. However, They would do it on his terms. Dromund Kaas was a very dark place, and they would have to go in with everything they had. If not, then they would suffer for it. Skywalker told the two of them his plan. On the day they arrived on the planet, Skywalker turned 18. What a special day for him to face down his truest rival in the Force. Before they approached the throne room, Bastila closed her eyes and focused on the Force, and used battle meditation to surround them and protect them with the Force. It would be the extra boost they needed. When they were surrounded by the Force, the three of them went in. However, Skywalker placed himself behind Bastila and Revan, hiding his body behind them. When the Jedi broke into the throne room after killing multiple guards, Bastila and Revan walked side by side to the throne itself. Vitiate didn't move. The Sith Emperor simply smiled. He told them that they made a terrible mistake by returning. He raised his hands and threw them forward, using Force Drain to steal their Force essence. The moment he did that, he saw Skywalker. The Chosen One leapt over the two Jedi and whipped his lightsaber across the room at the Sith Emperor. Vitiate lifted one hand and stopped the blade before it collided with him. The moment Skywalker hit the ground, he threw both of his hands forward and shot Vitiate through the throne room with the largest gust of the Force he could ever use. Both Revan and Bastila fell backwards and Skywalker's lightsaber fell. He used the Force and pulled it into his hand, and then he ran forwards. The Sith Emperor was getting up on the backside of the throne room. It was situated on a plateau above the city. Vitiate stumbled backwards. Skywalker was pressing a heavy assault, but the Sith Emperor used his lightning to defend himself. The fight was very intense, entirely based around who could land the first blow. If Skywalker could land the first blow, he would win, but if Vitiate could stop Skywalker, then he could send all of his minions onto the Jedi and destroy them. Anakin bashed his blade down, swinging for the killing blow but missing. Vitiate shot lightning at Skywalker again. Anakin spun around and using electric judgment for the first time by accident, as yellow lightning trickled out of his hands and they slapped the Emperor across the chest and he stumbled back. Revan and Bastila came running out of the hole left behind by Skywalker and they called out his name. He stopped and looked down at Vitiate. He knew that giving into his anger would lead to the dark side. He held his blade back and stopped. Vitiate grinned and rolled off the edge, but before he could escape and go anywhere, Skywalker reached out with the Force and stripped the Emperor's ability to use the Force from his body. The amount of power taking him by Skywalker sent a recoil into his body and he shot backwards. Luckily, he was caught by Revan and Bastila. The Sith Emperor, without the ability to use the Force, crashed into the ground and died on impact. His death marking the definitive end of the Sith. The buildings around the city on Dromund Kaas began to rip apart. Revan held Skywalker up as they looked over the edge and watched everything deteriorate. Revan told Skywalker he was proud of him. Anakin smiled at him. Bastila came up to Anakin's other side with her hand on his back and told him that she too was incredibly proud of him. As the city and the Sith Empire began to crumble, L3 rolled up in command of their vessel and picked them up, escaping the planet and the death of the Sith. As the Jedi returned to Coruscant, they informed the Council of their victory over the Sith. Revan and Bastila would retire away, remaining as Jedi loosely and starting a family, one that would have a long-standing legacy within the halls of the Jedi Order, with their descendants of course. As for Anakin, he would begin instructing students inside the Jedi Temple. Of course, being that he was Anakin, he had his own intentions. He would continue the lessons that his masters taught him, but he would keep it hidden from the High Council. In due time, when Skywalker was given the opportunity to join the ranks of the High Council, he would accept it. When he reached the pinnacle of power in the Order, he would continue to pass on his lessons to the Jedi around him, giving them all a new sense of inspiration and understanding of the Code and of the Force. Skywalker would return to Lothal throughout his career as a Jedi to interact more with the Force essence that gave life to the first Jedi. And while the Jedi Chosen One brought balance to the Force, there would be imbalance throughout history, as nothing can ever remain perfect. However, with the destruction of the Sith and a new legacy of teachings in the Jedi Order, true evil would never rise again. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Galavan Gaming, Darth Revan, Pente Bane, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Jedi Sloth, Mad Menu Studios, Anakin 003, Lemon Knight, Rex the Wolf, The Man with 3 First Names, Dark Saint 46, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash that like button, you know what to do. Let's talk about our story. We finally finished the 3-part story. Alright guys, this was fun. One thing that I always like trying to do is make sure I cover all the wide areas of Star Wars, and Legends is one of those areas. Look, last week we did a sequel story, this week we do a Legend story, and that's kind of the message I want to continue putting out. So this channel's for everyone, for all fans of all eras. Now, one thing I'm going to critique myself on, I'll be honest, I don't know Legends as much as I know Disney canon. That's just, I don't know it as well, because I didn't play the games when I grew up, and I didn't read all the books when I grew up. So there are going to be parts that I got wrong, and I will admit that I got that wrong, and I say that right now, just so you guys know, I got that wrong. There's going to be corrections, I know. I really do try and stay as true to the Legends lore as I can, same with the canon lore. I always try and stay true to the stories that are already there while changing them up for the purpose of the what if, as per usual. But I just wanted to admit that there's probably something I missed. I know it's coming. I probably mispronounced something as well. I know it's coming. But I just want to let you guys know that's why that happens. Otherwise, this story was really fun. We've done What If Anakin Was Trained by Revan before, and it was a really cool video because it was used by a Sith holocron and all that stuff. We did Luke being trained by Revan before, and that was fun, but this was cool because we got to go back to a different era. My big thing with this one is I wanted to see how you guys responded to me doing old Legend stuff, Old Republic stuff, and see if you guys want more of that. Of course, if you guys like it, then I'll do more Old Republic stuff, you know, using Metra Cirque, or using Satil Shan, or Steel Shan, or Stale Shan. You know what I'm trying to say. You know what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that one, the one that's the descendant, the youngest Grand Master the Jedi ever had, her. So, like, if you guys like this, then I'm gonna keep doing it. You know what I mean? So that's kind of why I'm playing around with all these different eras. You know, I like having an all-inclusive channel for everyone: Legends fans, Canons fans, sequels, originals, prequels, all of us here. I'm getting into High Republic soon. That's gonna come out soon. But I wanted to see if you guys like this, and I really hope you guys like this because, again, I know I don't know everything about Legends, and I know I'm gonna mess up sometimes, and I really try not to. I really do. I spend like an extra 3-4 hours on these videos than I do typical videos because I want to make sure I get the information right, and I tend to not get it right all the time. And so if you guys like that, then I'm gonna keep trying to make the best content Legends wise, as well as I do for everything that we do consistently in canon, with regards to the Skywalker saga. And so, that being said, this was really fun. You know, Anakin being trained by Revan. I wanted to give a story that felt a lot more full. We haven't done an Anakin train video aside from the Asajj Ventress one for a long time, and this one is a 3-part series. We haven't done a 3-part series for Anakin being trained, I don't think ever. And I felt like Revan is a special enough character to do that for. They're very similar. They're really similar. I mean, they really are. Revan and Anakin are like the same character. I'm gonna get hate for that, I know, but they're really similar. And so, like, having Anakin be neglected by Revan in the beginning is something I intended because it's kind of like, it catches you off guard. You're like, kind of like, wait, what? Revan wouldn't do that. And that kind of purpose was the whole point. The whole point was, it was kind of supposed to be kind of like A New Hope in a way, like the original trilogy. The first episode's light, like kind of lighthearted, but there's still like a tanginess in it. The second episode's a darker episode, and then the third one is the Return of the Jedi one, if you will. And so that particular aspect of this was a lot more fun because I got to develop the story a lot more than I typically do. You know, 30-minute videos are usually the length of videos for this channel, and they're long videos to do. They're hard videos to do. I'm not gonna act like they're easy. And so having more time to develop this is probably gonna turn into like an hour and 30-minute long full movie, and having all the time to develop that story and develop these characters and let them kind of thrive in this world, especially Anakin interacting with these other characters, it's a lot more fun. You know, having Anakin have this trust thing with Bastila going on, and have this thing with Revan going on. There's a whole reason why Bastila was the one that cut off Anakin's arm in the previous episode. You know, it was all a build up to this finale, right? This build up to this finale where they have to trust each other, and they have to fight someone that's like a tier below Palpatine. You know, Vitiate is, I think, considered, it depends on who you ask, but I think Vitiate's considered like a tier below Palpatine. Palpatine's the greatest Sith to ever exist. Fight me, you know. But Vitiate is basically Palpatine of the Old Republic, and so I wanted to make him feel as menacing as possible. Him being able to toy with Revan and Bastila. I think there's even a quote that says that Revan, from the Old Republic games, that's like Revan couldn't actually face Vitiate by himself, and that's what I wanted to portray, is that only Anakin could be the one to do it. Anakin could only be the one to bring balance to the Force in that period of time. Again, the same with the continuity in the canon, is that bringing balance to the Force lasts, but it doesn't last forever, and I wanted to make that point clear at the end of this, is that, yes, it won't last forever, but the Sith themselves, the Sith are gone, they're completely eradicated, and that Anakin brought balance to the Force, he destroyed the Sith entirely. And so there's going to be imbalance. Sure, the Republic's going to maybe fall, the Republic might get in conflict with other people, there might be corruption. However, nothing will ever be as evil as the taint of the Sith. The taint of the Sith? I may have said that wrong, but whatever, you know what I'm trying to say. Anyways, I love you all. I hope you all enjoyed this story. It was a lot of fun to do. If you want more Old Republic videos, you know what to do, smash the like button. Otherwise, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.